A YouTube World quick update here. I posted earlier that a video where I had stripped down my Diana Chaser 22 caliber, and I discussed I'm going to start looking at the function and the design to consider making some power modifications. Well, I replaced a heap of seals, which was fun to do. It was just fun to tear it down, clean it out, and replace some O-rings and seals. This guy here, let me get my finger in there. This seal was at the front of the valve. If you've got a Diana Chaser and you've pulled it down, you know what I'm talking about. It's at the front of the valve where the powerlet gets pierced. Okay, so that seal is exactly where the powerlet fits into. Let me grab a powerlet. All right, that's where it seals the powerlet. I replaced it with an O-ring successfully, because I saw this one and it was damaged and worn. I thought, oh no, where am I going to get one of these today? Well, I've got a box of O-rings from Harbor Freight Tools, and yeah, found one that fit just nicely, and it's holding a seal. So the first modification I did, this is the valve closing or valve return spring inside the valve. The hammer spring, when you cock the gun, you're compressing the hammer spring, you pull the trigger, you release the hammer spring, the hammer hits the valve and opens the valve to let CO2 out to push the pellet. Well, this is the spring that shuts the valve again. I went to Lowe's and found the right diameter spring. It's longer, but it's much, much softer, even compressed to the same size. It's only about half the tension. So I wanted to try that first. That was the first mod I wanted to try. I thought if the valve is easier to open, the valve will potentially stay open longer with less resistance. If you've got instead of having a strong spring closing it again, a weaker spring, I figured that the valve would stay open longer, therefore let more air through, therefore give the pellet more speed and more power. It hasn't really done anything, to be honest. The shot count is still the same. I'm still getting about 35 shots out of a powerlet before there's any power drop. Okay, so if this was, I can't really call this successful. I don't have a chrony to measure it, but if there was actually more air coming through behind the pellet, you would expect the shot count to drop. All right, well, it hasn't. If I'm using more air per shot, I should get less shots, right? Well, it's made no difference to the shot count. Now, anecdotally, yes, the pellets appear to hit my swinging targets with a little more whack, with a little more oomph. Without a chrony to determine it, I'm still going to call this a fail. All right? It could be just my imagination. It could be wishful thinking that those pellets are hitting the targets harder. It does appear that way, but I'm not going to suggest that. All right? So unless for some reason this spring is still letting the same amount of air out of the cylinder into the ports in behind the pellet, same amount but faster, okay, I can't really see why it would. But again, to finish off, this is first modification, the valve close or the valve return spring, going for a lighter valve. I'm going to have to call it a fail. Now, when I say fail, only a fail in the sense that there's no improvement. The rifle still works perfectly fine. All right? It's just, it hasn't officially made any improvement. So anyway, that's the first update. On to the next mod. Not sure what that's going to be. I don't know if I'm going to open the ports up. I don't know if I'm going to open the, take some meat out of the cylinder to create a bigger airspace in the cylinder. I don't know. The way I'm thinking, I would expect that to actually drop pressure, not increase. Powers are 1,000 psi. If you have a measured amount of pressure inside the chamber, which is that cylinder, that valve, and then you increase that. Okay, let me put it this way. You put a measured amount of air into a 30-gallon drum and then put that same measured amount of air into a 55-gallon drum. The bigger drum would probably have less pressure. So that's where I was hesitating in making the valve bigger. What would destroy my theory is if you make the valve bigger and the powerlet has the pressure to increase the pressure in the bigger valve. If you can make the valve bigger and hold more air with the powerlet adjusting, like having the power to keep the pressure. Hope I'm making sense. So if that powerlet has enough pressure, enough power in it, enough pressure in it to make the same pressure in a 55-gallon drum as it does a 30-gallon drum, for argument's sake, obviously this is not, but then you would gain something. So I think the valve it's only beneficial to trim some metal away from inside of the valve, and there's different ways you can do it. If you can make the valve bigger internally and keep the same pressure, well then yes, obviously you're going to have more air coming behind the pellet. So anyway, that's it for now. I said I've got to decide what the next modification is going to be, whether I make the valve bigger internally to give it more airspace, or whether I open up the ports before I do that, or do both. I don't know, but I'll keep you posted.